Hi, everybody. Welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 2. My name is Bob Judson, and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Thanks very much, and I really hope you enjoy what follows. Just before we get into this week's episode, I'd just like to make a small plea to ask you to support the show. If you value and enjoy the content that I'm providing, then if you can either go to www.patreon.com, patreon.com/leading4life, and you'll find links there and all the content there to be able to become either a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And it costs as little as £3 a month to do that. Alternatively, you can actually find the link to do exactly the same thing in your podcast provider's listing for this episode and all the other episodes. You'll find a support the show link. I would really appreciate that. It would hugely help me to keep this thing going, because I love doing it, but at the same time it does have costs, not just in time, but also in terms of actual physical costs associated with subscriptions and hardware and software and so on and so forth. So I really would be grateful if you would consider doing that. Let's get to it. Thanks. My guest this week is my good friend and colleague in terms of the Leaders Club, Steve Fletcher. Steve is these days best known as the founder of and chief executive of the Leaders Club and networking group that we basically meet once a week these days on Zoom and have some fascinating speakers and have some really great discussions around generically the topic of leadership, but there are lots of other things that we cover in there as well. I first met him about 10 years ago when I was transitioning out of the Air Force, and one of the things that was suggested to me was that joining the Leaders Club would be a good idea. And I've got closer and closer to it ever since, having set up the Deloitte corporate relationship that the club now has. I'm actually now the deputy CEO of it. So I've got to know Steve pretty well, and I thought he would be a fascinating target for an interview on this podcast, because prior to his time on the Leaders Club, he's had a very successful career in business. He's had a number of ups and downs, and he'll talk extensively about that. He's also been a Justice of the Peace for over 30 years on the Wirral Bench, and obviously has some interesting perspectives from that point of view. And we have a good discussion, not least about the kind of value of those roles in society and perhaps the lack of societal recognition for them. So all in all, it was a really great discussion, and I very much hope you enjoy what follows. Here we go. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for joining on the podcast. We've had such a long relationship and do so much together currently. It's really great to have you. So I really appreciate you joining.
Bob, I'm humbled and honoured by the invitation. I am not worthy. Anyway, I'm delighted. Very generous of you to ask me.
Not at all. You're definitely worthy, and I think it's going to be really interesting, because some of your career journey will be fascinating. Not least, obviously, 33 years, I think, on the Wirral Bench,
and it's still on the supplemental list. But I'll bore you about that later.
Yeah, exactly. There's plenty to talk about. I mean, and with that in mind, I mean, you've had a long and successful career, and you're culminating obviously in what you do now as the founder and CEO of the Leaders Club, which obviously I'm very proud to be part of. Just to get us started, though, could you give some kind of summary of your career journey along the way?
Surely, yeah. Just a few elementary things. Born in Wallasey in 1948, two wonderful parents, smashing brother, very ordinary sort of background. Ended up by passing 11 plus, going to Wallasey Grammar School, where I will not be remembered as one of the more gifted pupils. And though enjoyed it. Wish I'd been good at sport. But then joined something called Martin's Bank in 1965. And Martin's was the Liverpool bank, and worked in the head office as the junior within the bank secretary's department for 2 years, and taught me a lot, which I might well come back to later. Then had a spell in two of the branches for about 9 months. Then Barclays took over Martin's, and I thought, well, that's not going to be so good for Martin's people. So I ended up by, in essence, going across the road to where my late dad had worked at the Royal Insurance Company. And Royal, I then worked with them from 1969 through to, one way or another, 1991. And that'll be part of the journey, which I'll mention later. So it was an interesting start, nothing particularly spectacular at all. When I joined Royal, my career initially took off like a jet fighter, like one of your fighters, and then plateaued as if it had gone into to the top of an aircraft carrier, a fairly long one. But then everything, funny enough, and it's part of one's journey, changed when in the early 80s, the first of the desktop computers came in, the IBM computers. And I was basically senior clerical grade, but in the what was then being the organization methods department, which they were disbanding. They weren't making people redundant at that time. My big boss came to me and said, we'd like someone to organize the training with these desktop computers. So one didn't say no with this. And at the time, these were old with DOS-based machines with just basic stuff on there, something called SuperCalc, which was early spreadsheeting. And within our sector, the Royal, which changed everything, HP Desk, very early email system, which I taught myself and then started to train and then realized what I could do because my career had been not going anywhere particular. And Royal had segmented itself. It was a super organization, but it segmented itself into various operating companies, which actually damaged it in many ways. And each of the operating companies set themselves up as own individual fiefdoms. So it actually potentially easier to speak to a competitor organization rather than one of the other sectors of the Royal Life, Royal General, head office, this, that, and the other. So I realized that there were a few sectors, because our part of Royal had the HP system, HP 150s, which any of your listeners may just recall these things about the size of a television from the 1950s.
I remember it well.
Did have the email system. And you may just remember it had a touch screen, which is really remarkable the way that it went. And I thought, hang on, we can do something with this. So I started to do training myself and then training other sectors of the Royal. And that's when I thought maybe there's a new potential career basis, because up to that time, my own confidence and esteem was quite low for a variety of reasons. And I found that it worked. And then I thought, well, hang on, if I'm learning this, how can I start to do some of the training of other parts of Royal Insurance? So I had to be able to understand how the thing worked on the Hewlett-Packard system, but also on the IBM system. And so for the first year or so, I was training on this on my own and going around. And then I thought, hang on, I can do something more with this. And there are parts in your life which are life changing. And I can remember, because I'm padding backwards and forwards, Kay and I and the three children had gone to the Dordogne, taken our old car down there and a trailer tent and all the rest of it. And I hadn't got to the management grade, and Royal was very, very hierarchical. And I'm never going to make it, never going to make it. And I can remember we'd set the trailer tent down in Dordogne, in a car park in Dordogne, and the rest of the family gone to sleep. But I was padding around the place about 3-4 o'clock in the morning. What on earth? How do I take this forward? And it was the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened to me at that time. As I was walking around, and this starts to sound loony, a voice came into my head, as clear as you talking to me now, and said, in essence, what are you on about? And my response was, I believe I can make this into a business, a standalone business within Royal. What are you going to do about it? So there were 4 questions and 4 answers. And the final thing that came into my mind, get on with it then. And that, in a sense, gave me an extraordinary reassurance that there was something there. So I eventually, getting back to home, I then went into the office, and it was an impossible thing to do because we had to put together a business plan. It's not something that I did. And that had to be put through to the directors of Royal Insurance. You were talking, can you imagine a situation who's a senior aircraftsman within the RAF putting something through to the RAF board or the Air Chief Marshal? And that's in a sense what I had to do. And I did. And they accepted it. Something quite unique. And that gave then my career didn't look back. It meant I could take the thing further forward. So we then developed a brand new division called Royal Insurance Education Services. I got some staff, and that went well. We trained the trainers. We worked actually at that time, Ernst and Young were the Royal's accountants, and there were some people there doing some training, particularly in spreadsheeting, which I would never be good at. I'm not good now. So I needed someone because that was the pathing within the accounts department to be able to use spreadsheeting. Supercalc had gone the way of the world. It was Lotus 123, which was the big thing.
Remember that too?
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was the name. Forget the Microsoft products. Lotus 123. So we started training with Ernst and Young and doing some training around the Royal. Simultaneously with this, suddenly Microsoft came about. And Microsoft started to do, as you'll recall, Windows, this new thing where Lotus was still trudging down the DOS-based system, but suddenly there was Microsoft Windows. And I can make more of this business. So I managed to get Royal Insurance Education Services as Lotus' first authorized training centre in the north of England. And similarly with Microsoft, which was a real coup. So I had feather in my cap, which gave us an opportunity to go out and start selling training externally from Royal, which I wanted to do because otherwise I was just a cost. I wanted to bring in money to be able to further develop what we could do. And thinking about this, I needed to try and get a situation where I could get Lotus and Microsoft debate over their future strategies. And there was a chap called Mike Bailey who headed up Lotus at that time. And I went to him and said, Microsoft have challenged you to a debate on this. They believe that DOS-based systems are rubbish. I'm up for that. Well, they hadn't done anything. So I then went to David Svensson, who headed up Microsoft, and said, Lotus have thrown down the gauntlet on this. He said, I'll go for them for that. So I then had the basis of a great debate, which then organized the Maritime Museum in Liverpool and managed then to get the late, great, got away blue murder with this, the money to get the late, great Brian Redhead, and any of your listeners who can remember the early days of Radio 4 and the wonderful Brian Redhead, who was a voice of the North, to do in the essence, the introduction of the emceeing of the thing. And the day was a wonderful day and a wonderful success. And as a result of that, we then started to get other organizations attending that day, which allowed me then to run like a rat up the drain pipe and follow up and say, but hey, Royal Insurance Education Services offers external training. And it was on the back of that I managed to capture nationally the health and safety executives training. Again, we're talking about applications training, spreadsheeting, database, mail, and all the rest of it, and email. So I got health and safety executive, and then Boots. And Boots was a real coup because they're based in Nottingham. Health and safety executive had all these staff up in Liverpool, so we didn't have to do too much travel. And that became really interesting because then how did I cope with a situation with Nottingham now getting a decent amount of training in Nottingham? And initially I had to get in touch with the manager of the Royal Insurance branch down there and see if we could take down some computers in a van and a couple of my trainers and do something. But it didn't work. It was an insurance branch. And I really was metaphorically walking the dog. And I can remember now how we went about it because Kay and I had gone on holiday with the hooligans. And I can remember looking out in North Wales over Tywyn Bay thinking, what do we do? How do I square the circle with this? I thought, Nottingham Forest Football Club. Because Nottingham Forest Football Club was the jewel in the crown at that time. One's talking about the late 80s. So I got in touch with them and said, have you got anything within the club that could be, yes, have a supporters lounge. So we used to then get a van load with 8 old-fashioned computers and take them down and start the thing going. And the Boots people would come there for training. And then I realized what would make the real difference, and it did. You remember, of course, Brian Clough, the legendary Brian Clough.
Yep.
Well, Cloughie would come in at lunchtime, and I won't try and emulate his accent, and say, there's a practice game outside if anyone wants some autographs. Made it, got it. Because in the end of the day, It's rather like the Leaders Club now. People might talk about what was the event tonight. I knew that people would go home and said, "Where were you today?" I was at Nottingham Forest Club. I was on a training course. Brian Clough came in and that's the thing that made it memorable. It made a difference and gave us the real springboard.
And how did you get him? Did you just ask him?
No, he would just pop in. I mean, he was one of those affable types in a sense. He knew that there was something unusual going on at the football club, and I suppose nosily just popped in, knowing that there were people there, people who were Nottingham people, and probably would be supportive to the club. So the thing was just wonderful.
Wow, that's really talk about lucky break. That's amazing, isn't it?
But it's not life. I mean, for both of us, my expression, life's banana skins. But you also got to look at the things, how you do get a lucky break. And that was a considerable one. I enjoyed it. Things sort of springboarded out of that, Bob.
Yeah. So where did it go after that? Because I know you obviously ran a training business that then ended up in care, and so there's a couple of other chapters in this, aren't there?
Funny enough, if I can bore you, Richard, there's the precursor to the Leaders Club. Going back in the late 80s, Liverpool was coming out of a real doldrums time. I mean, you had all the political aspects, the things that people remember of Liverpool. When I'd started working in 65, I remember getting the ferry over every day and seeing the river full of shipping, full of liners going off, taking people to places new and new aspirations and so on. And within about 4 or 5 years, I'd been completely wiped out. And where the dockers had been treated very badly, the dockers now were in the ascendancy. So there were strikes and all the rest of it. And then you get the appalling Derek Hatton era, the riots and all the rest of it. So Liverpool was looked on generally as the pit. And Liverpool, though, was a fantastic place. I can trace my own heritage on the Fletcher side back to the 1500s, initially from Bolton, but then moving down to the Merseyside area in the early 1800s. So I know and feel the fibre part of this area. We don't all have to speak Scouse to indicate that we are local. So I thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. And part of the problem had been, having captured Microsoft and Lotus's authorization, you still found there's an extraordinary reticence for both of them being southern-based organizations at that time to come up north. So I thought, this is outrageous. And I remember doing training one time with one of the big steam shipping organizations. And the guy I was dealing with, who was the HR manager, he said he was fed up that he couldn't get in touch with Microsoft and Lotus. They would send up a junior salesman, but we were important companies and weren't being handled in the appropriate way. So I thought, a bit like Leeds, if you could get an eclectic group of people together and looking at the businesses and form something, you might well then get these organizations to change their mind. So I got in touch with a number of the major organizations that were then Merseyside, Shell, Littlewoods, ICI, this, that, and the other, to speak to, in a sense, the IT managers in the various organizations who all felt the same way. They were batting on a wicket which was unfair. And here we were as great organizations. So I said, let's set up an organization. And I called it Merit, Merseyside Information Technology. And Merit actually was immediately successful because the clout of the size of Merit meant that companies were then falling over themselves to try and communicate with and work with and all the rest of it. And I then found, as chairman of it, whilst doing my normal day job, I mean, it's completely unpaid. This is just a voluntary organization bringing people together. Sounds a bit like our current motto. It would work and should work. And Government Office Northwest became extremely interested in what we were doing and supportive. In fact, Kay and I were invited to a Buckingham Palace garden party on the basis of the work with them. And in essence, though as time went on, other people got involved with Merit. Merit lasted for 25 years. So I was pleased that it did, particularly during those doldrum years, bring things strongly together. So that had been part of it. But then, as you rightly suggested, the thing that I'd started with Royal, life started to change because Royal decided that they wanted to get rid of businesses or little things like mine, which weren't cool. So they ended up by selling it, in essence, without much of my knowledge. There was another organization within Royal, a third party organization providing contract services, the VNG Group. And VNG Group, VNG stood for Victor Noel Groves, blessed memory, I don't think, who said to Royal, I want to have a group rather than just contract services. I'd like to acquire your training organization. And Royal willingly let it go. When I come to sort of reflection later, I might well pass judgment on that. So, in a matter of time, where being part of the Royal Insurance family, I was now, in a sense, out with a completely unknown group and part of that, because Royal were no longer interested or strategically interested. So it then went overnight from Royal Insurance Education Service to VNG Education Services, but I decided I wanted it renamed, and we renamed it InterSkill within there. So I then plowed my furrow working almost independently, but with my team, building on the success of previous, but within an okay organization, but one that was almost destined for failure. And that's in essence what happened. So 4 years later, having had a nice, secure, warm Royal Insurance blanket, I was in my late 40s at that time, finding myself working within a completely different organization, though, as divisional managing director, so fancy name and a bit more of a fancy car, but no pension arrangements within of any appropriateness. You started to have to do something yourself, which I may reflect because I'd built up pension arrangements with Royal, but VNG Group went bust in 1995, and I was then made redundant as a result of that. For a year or so, I was trying to find my feet. It was a difficult, challenging time. Particularly, you got young family, then growing older with all the needs, biggest mortgage, biggest challenges in life. What do? I got a job with another organization, but that didn't work out. And then feathered around with something else. I thought, okay, the other way is up. I got to do it myself, and that's where started in the back bedroom of the previous house with Kay's help, what we ended up by calling the intuition training and consultancy. And going out to contacts and selling the services, I had acquired sensibly a freelance trainer's guide. I knew some people well, and I'd built up a reputation with this. So I bought a manual, a book of freelance trainers off a lady who was then had owned this. I bought the booklet and the right to be able to interface with these trainers, and that worked a dream. So I then ended up by building up my own clientele and then picking up some big clients along the way, which worked very well and set us going forward. So that's the way that operated for quite some considerable time, which takes it further forward, growing from intuition. Within the funny thing out of the blue, I can remember we were way in Sorrento. I got a phone call from this Irish guy phoning up and said, "Do you own intuition?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Well, let me tell you, we're going to be suing you." What? He said, my boss owns the name. I don't think so. Transpired, the Irish billionaire Dermot Desmond had ages ago painted the name Intuition for a future training requirement. So his guns were extremely big. He picked off another organization which was trading off a not dissimilar name down in London, which was run by a Syrian chap who decided to try and counter-sue, and he lost 50,000 quid on this.
God.
Where I'm realizing that Dermot Desmond's guns were a lot larger than mine. So hang on, let's see if we can get some compromise. And they said, well, tell you what, we'll give you 10,000 quid to help you with your move to another name. Is that fine? And
that's quite a shift from we're going to sue you to going to give you 10 grand to move. That's really interesting.
it's accommodating, isn't it? He's trying to strike a deal. And the funny thing was, we had a small staff, and I put it out there. Okay, we need to think of a new name. We need to think of a new name. Okay, and the one that came back was someone who's still a great friend, lovely lady. Said, "How about intercourse?" And I, no, I don't think we'll have intercourse. We called it Interskill, which ended up by being a good name for us. And Interskill was how we traded it. I managed to get some really, really good clients. But we'd also had a situation along the way which became toe crunching, in that we had become the training providers to a very large organization called Informatics. And we were turning over 25 grand's worth of work a week on a 4-week payment arrangement, which is fine until such time that 4-week becomes 5-week. And when your phone call to the affable finance director is suddenly not being answered, and you are beginning to start really, really worried. And this is, in a sense, why I love the Leaders Club, because it does bring minds together and experiences which can be quite different. For example, the sort of experiences you have are phenomenal. You've seen danger and challenge in a way that I will never have experienced. And this is why I have so much admiration for people from the forces. You will have experienced things which I could never imagine. On the other hand, I could see everything going down the pan, everything going down the pan. And how do you rescue it?
So how did you get out of that? Did they pay up?
Again, in a sense, comes down to building relationships. The guy who was the MD of informatics was a chap called Jabazain, Syrian guy. And one way or another, we got on. And through the building of this relationship, we were owed at this time about 120,000 quid. Because of this relationship, the day before they went bust, he slipped me 50,000. That still meant we were a monster amount outstanding, but we were slipped 50,000 quid. Now, most of my trainers were contract trainers, and this was November, late 90s, I think, probably. But it was November. And we would have a similar sort of arrangement. I would pay my people absolutely on the nail. So we would have a separate arrangement. If I was paid, they would get it a week later, just to go to the finance system. Part of my pie chart of life, principles, integrity, and ethics, and what you do, so vitally important. And I had to go to them and say, look, I can't pay you immediately today, but I promise you, I will pay you all. I will pay you all. So I knew that they were probably getting crunched. How well did they know me? Well, they knew that I'm a pretty ethical individual, that they were genuinely worried about the situation. And it was coming up to Christmas, as it was with us. And I paid every one of them within 8 weeks. And we took the hit. And it was one of the 2 or 3 big things along the way, which were real hits. It would have made so much difference to us. Having pocketed the 50,000, I could have been a brutal employer. Oh, just go and stuff yourself. You're all independent. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So we ended up by doing that and pulling ourselves through by really, really hard work. And I suppose because we'd gained a reputation for principle and integrity and ethics within the marketplace, it knew we could trusted by people who wanted to use our services. Time then moves on. We were doing a lot of work for an organization called QA based out in Cirencester, top-notch organization, training organization, up several levels for us. But we were working on the application side where they were doing system development and all the rest of it, QA training. And I'd formed a brilliant relationship with a super guy called Henry Jodrell. As the name sort of implies, his family goes way back and owned Jodrell Bank, but then they owned half of Chester. Eton, Cambridge, and the Guards, or very nearly that. Henry was a super guy, came in as an investor and partner in the business, and he was very good. We got on, and we can still get on well. But then there was a situation which then came to about 2007, 2008, which Henry was 20 years younger and was looking to change things. And I can understand that. So he said, look, I think we should try and put the business up for sale. So I could understand the only way that we could, in a sense, pay him out and move up on from there was to do something like that. That was all very friendly. So we decided to do that. And the business was sound. It wasn't no Rolls Royce in the driveway, but nevertheless, it was sound stuff. And we found a buyer, the Bray Leno Group, with a lot of respect for. They're based down in Barnstaple, and Bray Leno very much media marketing, advertising. And why should they have been interested? Because the guy who runs it, David Morgan, who's a fantastic entrepreneur, he, again, bit like the Vic Groves thing, but wanted to add training to the field in what they were doing. They already did HR training, and I'd met them, in a sense, in part competition with the health and safety executive, where I won the IT training side. They were doing the HR training side. So we knew each other from that side of ethics. So it looked as if the deal made sense to move on. We would be absorbed within, we could build and develop from that side. All right, we'd lose our independence. But what then happened? Well, bingo, we had immediately the credit crunch. And wow, did that hurt hugely, because within an enormously short period of time, no one wanted to buy training. No one was interested in the investment of individuals. On top of that, Bray Leno's, the deal which had been struck was beginning to be diluted, and somewhat seriously. On top of that, we had accountancies and advisors' fees, which were already beginning to ramp up. And then simultaneously with that, I'd had to have a total knee replacement. It had been on the cards for a while, and I went in to have a TKR, but then got a streptococcal B infection in it, which really did lay things low very considerably. And how did we get around that? Well, in the end, a deal was struck, but not in the way that it should have been. But it was a deal which allowed us to retain our capabilities within the Bray Leno side, who could run this still within that organization. So basically, they were down in Barnstaple, but allowed me to continue the business as it was. Henry moved into other avenues, but we still keep in touch. But then life started to have its own happenstance along the way. And what had happened, which was extraordinary, was that I can remember now, I'm still in touch with a number of my old colleagues. I never liked the word staff. Staff is a piece of wood. But no, they were colleagues and great people who we like to further and foster. It's quite a family arrangement, family values. And two of the guys done, Steve and Colin, a database course, DBase course, for one of the primary care trusts. At the end of the database course, the guy who was the accounts manager for Knowsley Primary Care Trust said, look, I've no handle on my funded nursing care costs. Is there any way that you can produce a database for us? So the guys came to me and said, we've got this opportunity. What should we do with it? I said, well, first, what's funded nursing care? We started to look at the glossary, and clearly that was people who could not fund their own nursing care, people in particularly challenging situation. So we built something, charged an elementary amount for it. There's a naivety, and off it went. And then within months, started to find a number of the other primary care trusts in the Northwest saying, ooh, can we have that? And can we do something about it? And I started to do some research on this and realized what we were doing with funded nursing care could also be for much wider parts of continuing healthcare, the much wider thing. And oh, yes, it could take in children's care. So it was then we realized, and this is where I renamed it Broad Skill, was capable of doing something, relatively speaking, unique. It was able to allow NHS trusts to manage, maintain, and monitor their finances when it came to what was going out and coming in those categories. So we actually had quite an interesting product. But now I needed to try and sell it. But here I was, stuck at home with custard coming out of my knee, unable to do any of the work particularly. And I thought, right, let me get a database here, and I'm going to phone everyone and try and see if I can convince them that it's just what they needed. And as I started to get my fitness back, it worked. It worked. And funnily enough, Interskill became de facto within that sphere of the NHS. And I was then said to Gray Lano, it's not what you do for a living. This is not anything to do with your excellent media marketing and advertising side. This needs to be handled separately. And initially they were reluctant, and it took me quite a battle. But in the end, I managed to have the thing taken out of Gray Lano, going into another organization where it was then modernized and all the rest of it. And that almost coincides with the time when I finished working, because by that time I was well and truly the oldest person by far within Bray Lano. Had some delightful comments. I was a pretty good salesman, and it had worked. So there was a degree of satisfaction at seeing the product had moved on. And it was really then that I started to be able to, I can devote a lot more time to the Leaders Club, which had gone back to, Bob, then the situation of 2008. And that's why when I'm boring people rigid about the history of the Leaders Club, it came out of that moment when everything was going upside down and what the hell do we do about it? And something that I trumpet on about the loneliness of leadership and the issues and challenges.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. I mean, it's a hell of a journey, that's for sure, in terms of the ups and downs and things you've gone through there. And I mean, just to pick up on a couple of bits, because I think, not least, it's interesting from a tips for other people thing. But as you said, you obviously did pretty well on the sales front, because just from going way back into your earlier sort of the genesis of your training organization, where you obviously managed to attract some pretty big clients very early on. How did you do that? Was that just you literally persistence, phone calls, gift of the gab? What?
It's just that. And it's funny, actually, because in reflecting on how kind you were to send some questions through, I don't do this. I think I'm the most boring person going, but it allowed you to momentarily reflect on being persistent in something which you really believe in. So yes, it was phoning up from just trying to find the number. How do I find the number? And trying to come over. And I think so many people do it wrongly now. I loathe it. Don't get too many calls now where someone would phone you up and say, "Hello, Steve. Hello there." There's the assumption of familiarity, and because I probably am an old geezer, that's not the way that I would work. I would expect give you the right to call me Steve, but please, initially, it's Mr. Fletcher, and I don't always want to be asked how my health and how are you doing today. They're not interested, and it's boring. So, in fact, it was finding a way, just being oneself, of getting in touch with people. But curiously, and it may sound ridiculous, now, up to about 1980, I was a pretty shy individual. I'd married Kay, we'd had the children, but as I'd indicated, in part, my working life was very much on the plateau. And what, in a sense, part changed this was Kirsty, our eldest, starting at primary school, and a school in an area where I lived all our life on the Wirral, but place of Heswell, which we didn't know too well, and going outside the school gate and meeting other parents, and then realizing that there was a PTA, and thinking from my experience and background, things like organization methods, I might have something to offer. And immediately going on, and then immediately building on that, and then before too long becoming a school governor, started to have the confidence which I can do this. I'm quite good at this. And then, funnily enough, the bench came along. I know you probably will know a little bit more about that. But then to add to getting to be known through things, this is why I think so many youngsters, and I'm talking about people in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s, live such busy lives, but it's actually the time that you devote to something outside your normal sphere. Give something to society. Get involved. The school thing, I got something personally out of it, but you were able to also contribute. Rotary. I had the privilege of being founder president of the local Rotary Club, and it was an unusual one. We were only the third breakfast club in the country, so we met at that time. But you meet fantastic people. It's not all about building business contacts, but it does build business contacts, as the PTA did thing, which it doesn't mean you immediately phone someone and say, "Can I sell you some training?" It builds up, rather like we find with the Leaders Club, as people's phenomenal stories like yours. Your story is so much more interesting than mine. But don't you find for each of the 300 odd presentations we have, you're like, blimey, heck, that's really interesting.
Yeah, some are very surprising, that's for sure. And I think it is interesting. I mean, when you look at you mentioned it, kind of modern day sales techniques. I mean, I sit there, obviously running my own business, doing what I do, and 20 times, 30 times a week, probably I'm getting LinkedIn messages or emails from people, saying, "Hey, we can massively boost your client base and we can improve your podcast and exposure and blah, blah, blah." And you kind of go, yeah, most of them, I don't give them the time of day. And it is occasionally, it's the differentiation thing, isn't it? Somebody comes up with something that's just a bit different in approach that makes all the difference. So you think, oh yeah, okay, that's quite interesting. I might actually, let's have a conversation then and let's see where. And it doesn't always work, but it certainly is. I think something that people need to think harder about how they actually, if they genuinely want to get you engaged, particularly in the world where it is a crowded market now for an awful lot of this stuff. You're trying to market things or sell things or productize stuff for people. There are an awful lot of people who can do that, and finding the way to make you the one that actually people you're going to catch the selector's eye is a real challenge for sure. I mean, that's definitely true with things like the podcast. I mean, it's there are thousands, millions of podcasts out there for sure. So it's about trying to find a way of making stuff attractive that resonates with people. No, it really is. It's very, very interesting to listen to that.
I think that's so true, Bob. It's so true, and I feel for a lot of people because, in a sense, I was there, and in a sense, it's wanting to try and help. Before this call, I had someone on who actually appeared on last night's presentation and is immediately trying to sell something. Well, I need some bucks into this as well. The Leaders Club really is super, and we may develop something more on that. But it's super because of people like you. But like you, it needs something in it to make it worthwhile. I'm not doing it purely as a charity, but I gain an awful lot out of it. But I've got to have something to make the wheels turn and to be able to develop some of the things further. And it's really good. But I do feel that if so many of these people could pause and think about what am I offering and what is a better way in. So this chap phoning me before and saying, "Hey, I'm a communications expert." Hey, when I look at it, we have a lot of communications experts. You have not only the ability of being a highly skilled pilot and lots of else, but you also sell yourself as a great communicator, facilitator, and trainer. Okay, so what's special? Well, you are special in lots of ways. So someone like the chap who phoned me before, I would far prefer to him to say, "Look, I'd like to meet other people like this. I'd be very happy to join the club and learn from what's going on," rather than the assumption. The immediate phone call for me is, "And I presume you'd like me online next week." Well, no, I've got the program largely planned up to the end of spring 2025. And I know with brilliant people like you out there, finding speakers and topics is not really a huge problem.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think that I talk quite a lot in some of the training that I do about the importance of networking for one, and it's a skill that some people are very uncomfortable with in terms of, and they don't necessarily think of it as a skill, and they don't. I mean, what I shocked some people recently on a course where I said, "Look, you need to start thinking of everything. Everything is a networking opportunity." Yeah. And they kind of looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, when you go to a wedding, all you youngsters are probably going to lots of weddings. Do you think that's a networking opportunity?" And they kind of looked at me with horror, going, no, it's not. That's a social event. I said, yeah, but it's still a potential networking opportunity. I'm not turning around and suggesting you get your business cards out and trying selling something to someone at the wedding. But, but it is obviously an opportunity where you can start building and nurturing relationships And the other aspect of that is the long-term nature of it. You're building, hopefully, relationships that may not be that important to you in the near term, but actually may be valuable to you in 10, 15 years' time or longer. And I think sometimes people are much too transactional. They're much too short-sighted about this. They want the kind of quick sale. And if you're a shopkeeper, fine, you want to do that. Obviously you're selling me something, and you don't care if you ever see me again. But if you're in most walks of life where you're into more the kind of deeper business level, if you like, then the relationship is really, really key. And another company I do work for, and it's one of the things that they absolutely major on in terms of was a whole modules of stuff on building and maintaining relationships and developing those into sales and making that into an art form, really, in terms of how you actually do it. And I think it's often lost in a world that is too fast paced, too much, right? We need to be sell instantly. If you're not getting results in the next 2 minutes. I had a guy the other day on LinkedIn. He connected to me on LinkedIn and he sounded quite interesting. And I said, oh, yeah, great to be connected. And literally every day, in fact, sometimes more than once a day for the next week, I was getting a direct message from him, but basically with this is how, what I think I can do for you. And I was busy. I was actually away and I didn't reply. And so the messages got more and more assertive to the final one that arrived, which I then did respond to, was a thing that said our current conversation. And it had a bloke talking to a brick wall. And I just went back to him and I said, that is just rude. Not only am I not going to have a conversation with you, I'm actually reporting you to LinkedIn for, harassment, inappropriate behavior, and disconnecting from you forthwith. Because it's just so unnecessary. And, actually it could have been probably quite a fruitful relationship if he'd been more patient and sensible about it. And I do think there is a real issue there, particularly in the sales environment, which is, where people are they're just in too much of a hurry a lot of the time. And I can understand why, because they're under pressure and, so on and so forth. But it just doesn't work for me.
You see, you're right on so many of these things. My life is now very insular on this insular peninsula of the world. I would, in many ways, love to be with you when you're in the Deloitte University environment with bright minds talking about a whole range of subjects. And I think that must be really exciting. And I'm always taken with the posts that you put on LinkedIn, because not only am I sure, because I know you're a great company, but I think you enjoy their great company and you will be giving them a lot, but you're also receiving from them.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I think one problem that I have is that you don't get that. I know that my generation is also, and I'm talking the mid-70s, had been deeply affected by COVID. And I know that an awful lot of friends that we've got are now much more insular and isolated as a result of that. Pardon if I say this insular peninsula, but it is the opportunity to keep one's mind afresh, which is why I love the club and what more we can do about it, which is probably for another time. But we were talking about just before, because I think it's awfully important to do things in a sense for others on a voluntary basis. And the bench taught me an awful lot, an extraordinary thing, because in a sense, this all, not quite by happenstance, just briefly what happened. When I left school, as I said, I went into initially insurance and then into banking, and both of them got exams in order to get ACII, so associate insurance. And the law will be part of it. So I was interested in the law from those and sort of passed those parts of the qualifications. And then around about 1980, as one does, I just got called up for jury service in Birkenhead and found the whole thing interesting. And being a big mouth, you go into the retiring room and with minimal instruction that time, that you, there we went in there, everyone was quiet. I said, I think we need to elect a forum of the jury. And they all said, and you're it. I said, open my mouth. I said, I mean, you then try and go through any form of decision. It's not something which would have particularly hit the headlines. But it again fostered an interest in the law. And what used to happen is the local clerk to the justices, because the courts were run independently at that time, not under the current government regime, so to speak. I mean, all part of the legal system, but they were self-entities, in a sense, funded entities, or the staff were, because the whole thing's voluntary. I mean, a number of people have assumed that I'm receiving a fat amount. Nothing. You get your minimal expenses and nothing, just the mileage, nothing more, and nor there shouldn't be anything more.
But I think you're absolutely right on that, by the way. I think there are an awful lot of people who assume that judges downwards get paid a ton of money. And of course, in some instances, that is true. If you're a high court justice, then obviously you're on a pretty decent wage. But at the bottom end of that, down at the magistrates' court, of course, is not the case at all. And I think that is very poorly understood by an awful lot of people.
You're lay justice. You'd be brilliant at it. I just happened to see this advertisement in the local rag, and I thought, find out a bit more. Went for an interview, and then I heard nothing more about it. And then 2 years later, in '84, then got a letter to say, we have it in mind. Now, I'm working for Wirral Bench.
2 years later. It took them 2 years to come back to you.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
The expectations, you're not going to hear a thing. How have you blotted your copybook? Because there's a fair amount of investigation. Are you right? But no, I mean, they're trying to look to a cross-section. And what did I have particularly to offer? So I heard nothing for 2 years. Then, bingo, get this thing through. And, oh, heavens. And it's then, I needed to go to Royal Insurance, my boss in Royal Insurance, and Royal were very good. They would assume that there were a few percentage of people who were in the Territorial Army, they were local councillors, they were this, that, and the other, and magistrates, and it was part of their service to the community. So I got, but no, it's we will accept this, and essentially it meant probably half a day a week in the magistrates' court. I have to reflect. I think for all of us, particularly in that environment, your career took something of a knock for a while, because you could imagine people, oh, Fletcher's off again, but Royal at the senior level were good enough to say, no, we'd expect it. And I mean, that's the way it went. It's probably one of the reasons it took a long time to get the promotion. But then I'm appointed, and it's an eye-opener. 300 magistrates serving court on the Wirral, Birkenhead and Wallasey, whole range of petty offences. And so one was doing the work. And then found along the way that each year there would be the annual general meeting of the bench, and there would be various committees which they wanted you to serve on and volunteers to serve on. And it was competitive. So things that interest me, I put my name in for, particularly stuff in connection with the young offenders, the youth court. And I got elected onto the panel. So the panel may have 30 or 40 magistrates. And then over a period of time, they would elect deputy chairman and chairman. And then suddenly, for one reason or another, I found, much to my surprise, I was quite popular. So I got elected as deputy chairman of the youth panel and then chairman. And I held that role down for 6 years. And it was a great thing having a fantastic group of volunteers all trying to work to provide justice on the Wirral. You did your adult court work, and you would do the youth work as well. And there were other panels, social and welfare, and all the rest of it. I also naturally became a member of the Magistrates Association, and then was elected by people to serve on the Merseyside branch of the Magistrates Association. That was interesting. And a whole range is building up really interesting people. It's exactly what you were saying 10 minutes ago. You're not handing business cards, but you're remembering stories which are told, which would end up by being part of the fabric of the person that you become through learning and listening from others. And I mean, extraordinary as time went on. I then chaired the Magistrates Association for Merseyside, and then was elected onto council in London, which I did for just a couple of years. But simultaneously with that, was then elected overall by my bench, having been one of 3 deputy bench chairmen, to be overall chairman, which was a huge privilege to have that degree of confidence. And the longest you could do was 3 years. It used to be a situation that there would be some grandee who would hog the arrangement, but now it was down to a maximum of 3 years, which was slightly too short because you'd gone through an election process and you were just getting to understand what was going on the first year. You were getting your feet under the table for the second year, and then you were moving your way out for the third year. So it could have done with being a bit longer, but it was what it was. But I learned an awful lot because you were involved with part of the training of the magistrates. But on top of that, I can remember so well working with the liaison judge, who would be a Crown Court judge. And ours was a wonderful guy called Sean Duncan. And I got on with him very well. And by the by, as listeners may realize, a senior magistrate, and I mean by one who's sat for some years, can also be sitting in the Crown Court on appeal cases. The first, if you dispute your theft, if you dispute your motoring fine and all the rest of it, the first court of appeal is the Crown Court. And judges, I think, in part loathe it, but they have two magistrates sitting alongside them to advise on the nuances of that side. And that was fascinating. But Sean Duncan was our liaison judge. And I remember, and I still think of it too frequently when I'm advising others about this, he used to talk about in the induction of the new magistrates, which I used to sit alongside him for, of the wise words of his father. Sean, of course, as I say, was a Crown Court judge, but his father being a magistrate. And the wise words that he gave to his dad, which he imparted then onto the new magistrates, he said, the vast majority of people who you see in front of you are unfortunate, unlucky, or inadequate. Very few of them are wicked. It's time and experience which will tell you which is which. And that broad brush approach underscored my experience so often of sitting as a magistrate, now termed a presiding magistrate, because the majority of the time, though you had two alongside you, you were the one who would probably do the pronouncement. And I am still absolutely absorbed by legal aspects, and that's why it's a delight to look in what we do with the club to have a law and justice forum, as long as having a very good health and social care forum, when you learned and lead so much involvement with that. But it again is learning from others and their experience and words along the way that mold you into the person that you are now, like it or not.
Yeah, a really interesting perspective. And I as you talk about that, I mean, I just wonder, because I have a view of society as it now is, where we don't recognize and reward some of this stuff in the way that we could and arguably should. So, as you said, magistrate don't get paid for that, or there's a big time hit there. You're probably actually, it's almost a negative credit, because a lot of companies are going to turn around and take the view, well, actually, you've got this side of desk thing that's just sucking up more and more time, and we're not paying you to do that. So this is you're almost part time with us. But actually, for the good of society, this is important. I mean, I the catalyst for me the other day was the whole conversation going on in the UK about the Prime Minister's chief of staff and her, as it was at the time, salary being more than the Prime Minister's. And my own reflection on that was actually that's more of an indictment that the Prime Minister's salary is too low than her salary is too high, because I think we have this ridiculous situation. When I interviewed Lord Brady for the podcast, we were talking a little bit about this, where actually politicians in particular, and I think you can extend that to an awful lot of other bits of society, if you want the right people in those kind of roles in today's world, you need to give them the right credit for doing the job. You need to be less intrusive into their private lives, and you need to turn around and pay them an appropriate amount of money. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be accountable, and I'm not saying you should, allow them to bury stuff and behave inappropriately and all those sorts of things. But I just think we are losing our way a little bit, because I can imagine now. I mean, you obviously did decades on the bench doing that. Actually, for most of the organizations I've worked with or for, they would be very intolerant of you doing that kind of thing, certainly on more than an occasional basis. I mean, when I was at Deloitte, full-time at Deloitte, I was a school governor at Christ Hospital, a bit like you with the bench. It was quite a transparent conversation about doing that, and they were happy about it to a point. But I had to be quite careful about time in work, on working days, where actually I'm disappearing off to go and do meetings. And if it was more than the kind of once a month thing, then probably someone's going to start cocking an eyebrow at me. Yes. And I just think it is a difficult area now for society as a whole.
I think you're absolutely right, Bob. And you touch on the point there. It's part of our wretched nature of envy. I think the Americans almost have the view, good on you. You're out there to build on your affluence and so on. But we now, I'm paying you that. The whole thing is pay on paying, yet aspirational. We need to inspire aspiration more and more, which is in a sense part of what we try and do with the club. I mean, if I look on it, you and I dwell on this, I'd love to see a younger audience. I'd love to see expansion and development further. In many senses, it is what it is, and one needs to have that fillip to do so. But don't give me envy. I mean, there's lots of part of the thing in here I would have changed if when I go along. The things I'm bloody glad that I've done. But on the other hand, things one would have taken a different path. Because I remember thinking when that thing in the Dordogne, when you suddenly felt parachuted, you were suddenly in the middle of a forest and you had to make decisions the way to go forward. I mean, in this, I'd had the four sentences that come over, the four responses, and you had to do something about it. And initially, as you're trying to build something new, you see as a little pathway and you're focusing on that. But in time, you'll get to a crossroads or whatever. And some of the decisions you'll make are right and some of the decisions you'll make are wrong. And it's how you then try and get back and modify it. But it is what it is. You just got to make the best of your lot.
Yeah, I'm a real believer in forks in the road come and go, and you take a decision and you go down one particular avenue. And I actually had a great quote from, again, was on a podcast with Ralph Arundel and his son Henry, and Henry Arundel, yes, rugby player, and Ralph used to work for me. And we were talking about this issue of forks in the road, and he came back said, yeah, somebody said to him that it's okay to look, but don't stare, backwards. And I thought it was a really great quote, because at the end of the day, that is what so many people do. They live in this kind of, oh, if only I'd done this kind of thing. And I mean, I always ask the question, you hinted at it a second ago, about what would you have done differently across your career? But in many instances, quite a lot of people say, well, I don't really do kind of regret on this. And I'm like that. I have to say, I ask it, but I absolutely have that view. I mean, you sort of hinted you would do a few things differently.
I think if I was, because part of the question's in there, I think I'm a bit, I would have probably tried to be more reflective than I was, and less impulsive. And I still have that. I mean, when it came to the departure for Royal Insurance, I should have stuck far more in getting out what I needed to do. And I didn't. And we had the situation, which has truly been challenging along the way, of I should have bought a really, really brilliant deal out of them. In the end, I go from not quite a mess of pottage, but it wasn't a great more. But the worst thing was having to take my pension out of the Royal, because it could no longer be in the Royal scheme at that time. And one way or another, through what seemed to be sensible financial advice, put it straight into the Equitable. And that decision cost us in 1992 50,000 quid. And if you can imagine that with compound interest now, our life would be utterly different. So if you're looking along the way, how can one be more? How could one have altered that? But it is what it is. I'm lucky that I still got the current Mrs. Fletcher, who I see along the way there, who's still at just 51 and a bit years. But, it is as I go along. Life's banana skins, and you either lay dormant on the ground or you do something about getting yourself up and dusting yourself down. If I look at the wonderful, august people you've had on this podcast, huge achievers. Well, I know along the way, we've done okay, and I love the stimulus of meeting people with a variety of successes. This is why that by and large your podcast really brilliant. The speakers that we get for the Leaders Club, I will try and avoid like the plague of blowhard. I like people who've encountered, like I have, like you have, like the vast majority of us have, life's challenges. Mm-hmm. And then how you get over it, round it, under it, or whatever. You step it to one side. That's what it is. And it's that I still find as, the oldest person, I think, on these things, I still find I'm learning. But curiously, it's what I said to you 10 minutes ago. If I could suddenly get on a transporter and be alongside you and the bright minds in France, my God, that would be a stimulus and stimulating. But it is what it is.
Yeah, you're right, though, about, I think it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot to other facilitators quite often, obviously, with some of the work I do now, I work with new facilitators, particularly at Deloitte University, actually, who've never done it before. They're usually in the business, so they're coming along for the first time. And one of the things I always say to them is, look, people will learn more from what you did wrong than what you did well.
Absolutely.
And they'll really appreciate your honesty and your kind of upfront approach to that, because it will be really helpful to them, because everyone's nervous about, particularly when you're dealing with people who are newly promoted to whatever grade it is and whatever organization it is, they are inevitably a bit uncomfortable. And therefore, actually finding out that you haven't had a perfect trundle up through the steps on the ladder is a really, really important thing for them to get, because then they appreciate that, yeah, actually, it's okay to make the odd mistake, and I need to handle it in this way and that way. And oh, wow, yeah, I've been there too. And that's such a relief to lots of people. You can physically see it in the room when you actually get people who are talking about some of the stuff that's gone wrong on areas they've really learned from. It does make a huge, huge difference to them. It's one of the reasons I kind of do the highs and lows stuff on this. Talking of which, what's your high point then?
Funnily enough, if you talk about high point, can I categorize it? If you're looking at the here and now, it's probably the club. But if you're looking on things, which I think you've got to have memorable event of your career, then I'd like to say that, just as I build up to it, the top one, of course, is marrying the boss. and the children. And Kay has been an excellent sounding board. It's not always the sound I like to have coming back to me. So if I say yes, it's been a very good, happy marriage, and she's put up with a lot. And the children, 3 wonderful children. I've enjoyed hugely the 2 Royal Garden parties that I've attended, and the House of Lords dinner. But if you wanted one event which I would take away with me always, it was that dinner on HMS Victory, going back. I mean, that was such a unique, pinching, how on earth did I manage to get here? It was, I mean, it's almost daring yourself. How on earth can I get there? And it might sound elementary to others, but it's, if you've ever been on, there are very few people who can be catered for any one time. For anyone who's got any weakness, predilection when it comes to ladder arrangements, then it can be very challenging, and you have to prepare yourself. But I think that unique historical environment and the people that you were with and the stories that were being told there was a great one. Loved it.
Yeah, nice. No, it's sort of one of those money can't buy experiences for sure, isn't it? I have had dinner on Victory, and it is very special.
Well, you would have a lot more problem because you're tall. You would be banging your head all the way at least 5.
Yeah, I do. It is interesting to reflect both on, in that kind of environment. Total digression now, but on that kind of environment, or indeed when I was on Coningsby, commanding Coningsby, and I was on the Battle Britain Memorial flight, I was always, every time I went into the Lancaster, and I flew it, was lucky enough to fly in it a few times, but also obviously was showing people around it lots and lots of times. And you get in the back door of the Lancaster and walk up forward to the cockpit, and then to the bomb aimer's position up the front, or backwards down to the tail gun. And the space in that airplane is just non-existent. I mean, it was built for what it was for. It was a heavy bomber to carry a lot of bombs. And so on your way up the airplane, you stepped over the flapjack and then the wing main spar, and it was just an obstacle course basically as you went up. And I would always say to people, now, okay, you're finding it challenging doing this. Now think about getting out of this airplane when it's burning at night and falling out of the sky. And that's why, of course, an awful lot of them didn't. But it is extraordinary. Some of these, and Victory would be exactly the same. I mean, the conditions. Imagine if you're having dinner on the gun deck in Victory, which is a fabulous thing to do. But imagine that gun deck when it was a gun deck, and the noise and the fumes and the kind of whole environment must have just, obviously in a world where health and safety didn't exist at all, it must have just been the most extraordinary environment to be in. So yeah, it's a privilege, but at the same time, it does make you reflect a little bit on the world we now live in.
Yes, very much so. Well, I mean, very, very briefly going back, because you've been generous with your time. It is the speed of changes which are coming about, because there we remark on that chap trying to get in touch with you through LinkedIn and people with me. Huge changes which are going to come about with AI are going to be transforming. I don't think my age has any appreciation, we can downplay it. But, if we were doing this presentation in 5 years' time, the world would be very different. The world is a very dangerous and challenging one. And that's why we like to cover the subjects that we do. But nevertheless, I think of all those people who are in call centers who are trying to earn a living, that living is going to disappear. The whole thing can be automated, but we still need so much. And this is in a sense with the club. We need to get together. It's lovely to see over the airwaves the whites of the eyes, but there's nothing quite like meeting someone and shaking their hand, an actual pat on the back, and reflecting in a human environment, a joke and reflecting.
No, you're right. And I think again, we've sort of touched on the Leaders Club all the way through here, but it is, I mean, I'm very, very proud of my role alongside you in it now. I mean, having you started it a long time before I got involved, but from sort of 2014 when I first came to my attention. And it is interesting, as you say, doing the online stuff through COVID works really, really well, but the face-to-face thing does make a huge difference. And just that, again, when you look at the work environment in general, and it's a topic that comes up all the time in terms of training courses that I do these days around hybrid work and getting people into the office versus working from home. And I think it is going to be really interesting, not least in the context of what AI is going to do and where society's heading to in the next 10 or 15 years. If you could have a crystal ball these days, I think it would be absolutely fascinating to see what it's going to look like. Because when you have got an environment that actually pushes people away from being face-to-face, it is definitely a challenge. And I think it's hard to see how that ends particularly well unless something magical happens that opens up all sorts of other new avenues for people. And I do worry slightly about that. And I think, that's before you start talking about geopolitical uncertainty and everything else that is there, and climate, and, God knows what's, as we speak, And
I agree hugely. And you've only got to listen to the Today program, and part of the thing that was said yesterday, the new employment laws are going to be really challenging because our country is based on entrepreneurship and SMEs and I would really worry. I've got a great friend who's, in fact, a little bit older, who runs an acoustic control organization. He's got 4 or 5 employees. He'd be really worried about the new employment laws. He wants to give good careers and opportunities to people, but be terrified about what apparently the situation which will exist now regarding the changes in the law. But maybe it's something we should run as the club sometime. It's the issues and challenges, the banana skins of life.
No, you're not wrong. So just before we finish, Steve, there are a few things I haven't covered off yet. We talked about high points. Sadly, there's got to be some low points. I mean, you've talked about some of your ups and downs along the way. What is the kind of the lowest of those low points, and what did you learn from it?
The lowest of the low points was the whole thing through 2008, where I thought everything's going skew. Here we were up to our eyes. We were in a big house, lovely house, and we were having to vacate that. My health through the potential sepsis was taking, everything was going. So that was the low point. But out of that, you build, if you call it the club. So it was something that was the springboard of knowing that, as I use it, the loneliness of leadership. One did really feel lonely and frightened in a sense at that time. So what do you do about it? Do you completely succumb, or do you find another opportunity? And in fact, that was knuckling down with the broad skill stuff. But it was, you end up by having, they used to have in the old Variety Act days, people putting plates on spindles and rushing around the thing. You suddenly see one going wobbly, need to go over and try and keep the thing going again. You can't imagine a variety show that would do that now. But that was really, 2008 was a stinker.
Yeah, everyone still talks about plate spinning though, and they're right. I've had a number of jobs like that where it is about keeping all the plates spinning and not letting anything smash, and it's really quite a challenging thing to do. And I think, you should be very proud of what you've done with the Leaders Club, because actually it is one of those organizations where it does, as its motto is, bringing great minds together, and it does do that. It brings people together in a way that is really, really informative and interesting. The countless presentations I've attended over the last 10 years, there are very, very few of them that I kind of wish that, well, you know what, I could have saved myself an hour and a half. The overwhelming majority are really interesting, really informative. I don't always agree with all of them, And again, I think that's one of the other challenges of today's world, that breaking free of the echo chamber of life, particularly on social media, where actually people are at serious risk nowadays of just getting fed a diet of what basically further reinforces their own prejudices, and everyone has them. So it's just a question of trying to make sure you break out of that and you actually at least listen to the argument, even if you don't agree with it, with other people. And I think you should take great credit for what you've achieved with that. And your sales technique in terms of managing to get people to turn up to the Leaders Club you still clearly haven't lost that skill. That's for sure. It's very, very evident in what we do.
Too kind, too kind.
Last question, Steve. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
You know, I saw you giving this. I suppose, in a sense, why the difficult? Why do you keep doing it? And that may sound silly, but this was in part born by, for a long time, not having belief in what I could do, and not actually having that belief in myself. This starts to sound egotistical. I don't mean that. I mean, in a sense, and saying, look, I'm quite good at doing this. I will never say I'm proud of things. I don't like the word pride. I don't mind in the context that others do. I'm quite pleased if things go well. I think modesty is a virtue which is understated now. So it's when people will say, I don't know why you're bothering. I bother because, rather like the L'Oreal thing, and I'm talking to someone, because you're worth it. Because so many of the people out there have stories that are really fulfilling. And as I say, I learned so much from the club. And if you've only got to look at the program, which is coming up, which is very much done by walking the dog and all the rest of it, but talking to you and reading the press, you look at life's issues and challenges, and that's why I do it. And long may it remain. I'd like to see it broaden, widen. I'd like to bring in more dosh and a whole range of things. But I do get some people say, I don't know why you bother. But I do. And so do you.
Oh yeah, well, I for one am very glad you bother, because I think it's a great organisation, and it is all the things we've been talking about, and I think actually bringing all the stuff you've talked about in your journey, which I have to say I've learned lots about you that I didn't know.
I do apologise.
No, not at all. No, it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm very grateful to you, Steve. Thanks very much indeed. It's been a real privilege.
I'm more than grateful to you, Bob. You're a great pal, and I value hugely the last 10 years. It was a great thing in pitching the original idea to Chris Recchia, again, born out of my huge respect for the armed forces. As I sometimes say, war is declared, and who knows what's going on today. I'm too old to be part of Dad's army, but I was too young to do national service. It's the likes of you and others who've kept us safe, and which is what I hugely respect. You bring with you huge knowledge, experience, but quite often you can bring with you other sides of issues and challenges which you can learn from. So long may it continue. So I thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Steve. All the best. Thanks a lot.
Cheers now, Bob. All the best.